In this video, I'm going to show you how to build this web application called Financial Analyst. And what it allows you to do is select multiple types of reports. So one type is the single stock outlook, and the second type of report is competitor analysis. And so what this does is present you with an input box, and I can type in the ticker symbol for any given stock. Let's say that stock is NVIDIA. And what this is going to do is search all the recent financial news and synthesize it and write a report using GPT-4 and Llama Index, which is the subject of this video and the last one. So this is a continuation of video 11 in the series where I introduced Llama Index and the idea of automatically fetching financial news and synthesizing that information so that it can be queried using GPT-3 or GPT-4. As you can see, in less than a minute, I have this nice financial report here called NVIDIA Stock Outlook 2023 through 2027. It discusses the growth prospects and potential risk and headwinds, and it's all about the outlook for the year 2023 through 2027, and it uses up to the date information, up to the date news that we prepared in the last video that I did on financial news. So all of that news was fetched dynamically from interactive brokers, and I indexed it using Llama Index and used GPT-4 to create this entire written report. The second option this web application has is I can do competitor analysis. Now in this version, which I introduced in the last video, you're going to be able to enter in two different stock symbols, and based on all the news it analyzes, it's going to be able to talk about the competition between these two stocks. So Microsoft, who is working on Bing and OpenAI, and Google, who is working on Bard and their own large language models and chips. As you can see, once again, in under a minute, I have a full report, Microsoft versus Alphabet, a battle of AI and search engines, and it makes many different key points, just like that, 5 key points. Samsung's potential switch from Google to Bing could signal Microsoft's lead in the AI race. This just happened last week, so this, again, up to the date information. It mentions Alphabet's AI chatbot Bard, which had a setback in February with inaccurate information. It mentions many competitors emerging in the AI space, which questions Alphabet's longstanding dominance in online search. So what happens if Apple decides not to renew its $20 billion contract with Alphabet, which is up for renewal this year, or maybe they use it as a negotiation tactic. So as a quick recap, in the last video, we fetched hundreds of articles up to the date using interactive brokers, and then we were able to create an index of that data using Llama Index. And now what we need to do is create this user interface and discuss how to generate these financial reports and how to use GPT-4 instead of the default GPT-3. So in the last video, we wrote this code that indexed our data and saved that index to a file. And then we wrote this little snippet of code, which loaded that index from the file. And then we could just run index.query and ask it a question like, what are near-term risks to NVIDIA? But it went directly to the console here, right? It's not a graphical web application. So we want to improve upon this in 2 ways. Number one, we want a user interface so that we could share this with a user, have them type in the stock symbol, and then our query will automatically do the work for them. We don't want them to have to write the query, write me a financial report for NVIDIA. We just want to say, we just have an application that is a financial reporter, and we're saying just type in the stock symbol and we'll do the rest of the work for you. So a simple input box interface and just choosing the type of report is what's going to control the prompt that's sent to our language model. The second thing we need to cover is how to swap out the language model we're using. So when we're querying using the defaults here, this is using GPT-3, which has a much smaller context window. So if we want to write these really long reports, we want to use GPT-4. So GPT-4, which is rolling out right now, has support for up to 8,000 tokens for some people. That's what I got approval for. But there's also a version that supports up to 32,000 tokens. So with this larger token limit, we can send larger prompts, maybe some larger context for it to operate on, and get some larger responses, and in turn generate these long form reports which have introductions, maybe bullet points. I've even generated one with a big table of contents. So depending on what models you have access to, you might want to swap out that model. And this is especially important because we're not always going to be using OpenAI's models, right? There's other open source tools that are coming out right now. For instance, Stability AI, who created Stable Diffusion for image generation, just recently recently released April 19th, the first of its stable LM suite of language models. So what if you want to swap out OpenAI and instead of paying them money, you want to use this open source language model that's free and you can run it on your own server rather than calling some API and spending a few cents at a time and getting nickel and dimed by OpenAI, right? And so the nice thing about Llama Index here is that it provides this uniform interface, just like a framework that lets you switch between databases. You can switch between language models by just specifying this service context and giving it a different language model. And so let's talk about how to actually do this. So the first thing I'm going to do is walk you through the changes that we need to make to this code that we wrote in the last video. So this one uses just the defaults, GPT-3, and we query that index. What are near-term risks to NVIDIA? And we get a response, and it's a short response, right? And so let's expand that out. So let's look at what I did in this app.py. So this is the version that has a user interface. So in the previous video, we imported just GPT simple vector index. And so this is nothing new. We give it our OpenAI key, and we have our environment variable containing our OpenAI key. Now here's what's new. So you see from Llama Index, now I'm importing this service context. And so you see here in the service context here, it contains what's called an LLM predictor. So we can change the large language model. So I'm importing service context and LLM predictor. So it's a wrapper around LLM LangChain from LangChain. And so it says LLM from LangChain used for prediction, defaults to OpenAI's Text DaVinci 003 model. Please see LangChain's LLM page. And so you see Llama Index actually interacts with LangChain. And so if I look at the LangChain documentation here, you see models, LLMs, reference, and I can look for OpenAI here. The default is Text DaVinci 003. And so how do I specify that I want to use GPT-4? So from langchain.llms, from the large language models, I'm going to import OpenAI. So this OpenAI class right here. And when I instantiate that, you see that I can pass in a model name. And so I'm going to create a new variable called LLM. I'm going to instantiate OpenAI. And on model name here, I'm going to specify GPT-4 and a max number of tokens. And so I used 6,000 here. So I have access to GPT-4 8K. There's also a GPT-4 32K, which I guess you have to be super special to have that one, or maybe I haven't requested it yet. And so I'm going to click into OpenAI here, and you see the default here is Text DaVinci 003. And you see there's also like a class for Azure OpenAI, for instance, and there's also one for the OpenAI chat model, and there's a bunch of other models in here. And so all I need to do is instantiate this OpenAI model with model name GPT-4, and then I need to instantiate this LLM predictor class, which we imported here, and I just pass in that as a parameter. So now I have a variable called LLM predictor, and this uses GPT-4 here, right? So then I just need to instantiate my service context here, right? And so I do service context from default, and I pass it this LLM predictor that we just instantiated here. So I do LLM predictor equals LLM predictor, and now I have this cool service context, which has my own customization. So I'm overriding the default of GPT-3. And now when I load my vector index, we already talked about this in the last video. So I'm loading it from files. So we already saved this in the last video. So indexnews.json right there. And then I'm going to pass in the service context. So I'm saying load it from disk, but we're going to be using GPT-4 here. So just with a handful of changes, 6 or 7 lines of code, we're able to change this and provide this service context that lets us use GPT-4. So now when I do my index.query, I can write a longer report. So I'm going to say write a financial report that describes competition between NVIDIA and AMD, right? And so I'm going to send it that prompt, and then I'm going to store the response right there, and I'll just print the response, and let's see if it writes me a longer report. And I thought this message was a little bit confusing because I'm clearly not trying to use a chat model. I'm using GPT-4, not GPT 3.5 Turbo or whatever it's called. And yeah, so this warning seems invalid to me, but it's something I'll keep an eye on. I looked at GitHub, and there's a current issue from a couple days ago where people are describing this. So maybe it's a warning that's not quite accurate, or maybe this is going to change a little bit. So got to keep track of these tools. And I think Llama Index and LangChain are two tools that are worth following closely because a lot of people are using them right now to develop cool things. There you go. So I have my report there. Wow, look at that conclusion. A lot of stuff here. So competitive analysis. So look at that. So financial report, NVIDIA versus AMD, competitive analysis, introduction, AI, gaming, data center applications, NVIDIA overview, AMD overview, competitive analysis on GPUs there. AMD on the other hand, conclusion, competition, high performance computing, market intensifying, blah, blah, blah. So you get the picture here. We were able to take Llama Index, which we learned about in the last video. We introduced it, and now we're able to customize it a little bit. So now we're just swapping out the model. And then in the future, we're going to maybe swap out the different type of indexes, build different types of applications on it and so forth. I think I'm gonna try the SQL generation, which will, I think we can build something pretty cool with that. So that's something I'm gonna do coming up as well. All right, so now I don't want to just type this into the code. We want to let users be able to input something in a box, or we want to make it more user-friendly. We don't want to write this index.query stuff. We want a cool text box. So how do we do that? So we're going to use Streamlit for that. And so if you go to Streamlit, so it's at streamlit.io, faster way to build and share data apps, and you go to the documentation right here, it'll say get started, and all you need to do is install a package called Streamlit. I use just pip install Streamlit, so the Python package manager. And so if I look here, you see we already installed this in the last video. I had Streamlit as part of the requirements.txt, but if you haven't installed it before, you can do pip install Streamlit just like that, and it'll install the package. Now, once you have the package installed, you just need to import it. Most people do import Streamlit as ST, and then with that ST, you can just call a bunch of different functions. And so the simplest function to call at first is called header. And so you can create a header on your page by calling st.header, and you just give it some text, financial analyst. And to run a Streamlit application, it's the same as just running a Python script, but you have these Streamlit commands, and instead of just running it using Python, you do a Streamlit run, and I called this file app.py. So I'm gonna do Streamlit run app.py, and look at that, it loads up a web application, and there it is, a header that says financial analyst, and it's running at localhost port 8502, and you can customize the port and all of that as well. So that's good to go. And so that's not a very interesting interface yet. And so what I can do is use one of their widgets. And so if you look here under their components, so I'm gonna go up here, and it says create an app. And so you can look at some of these different components. So there's st.title here, and let's just play with a few more of these. I'm gonna call this financial analyst, and then I'm gonna do financial reports, right? And let's do that. So I'm gonna save that, and let's rerun this. Look at that, there's a title financial analyst and a header that says financial reports. So that's pretty cool. So what I'm gonna do now is go straight back to the documentation here, and I can click on, let's see, API reference. And so there's a bunch of different components here that you can use. So there's subheaders, captions, code blocks, dividers, and so forth. There's charts, graphs, all kinds of stuff. So let's look at what types of widgets we want. We want this select box, so that's pretty cool. So that's what that looks like, st.select box. And we just need to give it a label and some options, and there's tons of examples in here. And so let's say we want this select box. And so I did that there. And so this would display a select box. The label would be, how would you like to be contacted? Email, home phone, mobile phone, and so forth, right? And so what I did was write it here. You can copy it from the code that I linked, but I'm saying report type equals st.selectBox, and I want to ask what type of report do you want? And there's two different options here, single stock, outlook, or competitor analysis. And it'll store whatever the user picks will get stored in report type. So it's really neat how easy this makes it. And so now if I go back to my app, and then I do, let me see if I can rerun this thing. There you go. So I rerun it, and there's a rerun button up here usually as well. And so now it says what type of report you want, single stock outlook or competitor analysis. So that's good. I have my select box. And then now if I do st.write, so if I just write a variable to the screen, so I have a variable called report type, I'm gonna write whatever I pick to the screen. So I'm gonna do rerun. See how it says single stock outlook? Now if I change it, right? it says competitor analysis, right? So what I'm gonna do now is conditionally display input boxes depending on whatever the user chooses. So if the report type is single stock outlook, I'm going to display a single text input. So there's also a widget called text input. So that's select box, but let's say I want a text input. I'm gonna go back here. And so if I scroll down and look at the example, it says title equals st.textInput. We just give it a label, and if we want it to have a default value. So I just want a label, and I'm going to use st.textInput. And so I do symbol equals st.textInput, and then I'll do st.write symbol. So whatever they type in there, I'm going to print it back out to make sure it's working. So there's that. It says source file change. I can rerun, and I can also say always rerun. So anytime I save, it'll rerun. So I'm going to do a single stock outlook, and you see how, look, dynamically it displayed my text box because I chose single stock outlook. And so now I can type NVIDIA in there. It says press enter, and it writes NVIDIA to the screen dynamically. So it's responding to whatever the user does in the web browser. So now what I'm going to do, if they enter in a symbol, I want to run our GPT-4 query using our index. So we created the index up here, and we just need to call index.query if they enter a stock symbol. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to uncomment that out. And you see I have this with.spinner as well. And the reason I have that is because it actually takes at least, it might take 30 seconds to write this report because it's synthesizing a lot of information. So I have this news here, these articles. I have maybe 1,000 articles in here right now. So it's going to take a while for it to determine which chunks of text are important, send it to GPT-4, and GPT-4 is going to crunch on it for a little bit. It's not instant here. So what I want to do is generate a spinner for the user to show them it's working on it so they don't think the application is broken. And so I can go back here and see what else I have. So let's search here. There's a widget called Spinner, which is also very easy to use. You just do with st.spinner and show a waiting message while you're waiting. And so I did with st.spinner, and I put generating report for symbol. So I'm using an F string here, and I'm displaying the symbol. So say, hey, I'm working on it. I got the symbol. And then I'm just going to call index.query, just like we did in the last video, but I'm going to do a special prompt. I'm going to say, write a report on the outlook for symbol. So that's dynamic stock from the year 2023 to 2027. Be sure to include potential risks and headwinds. And I'm going to write the response right there in the browser. And so let's go ahead and test this out. So what I'm going to do now is run this again. So I'm doing rerun here and single stock outlook, and I'm going to do Google. So I'm going to do Goog just like that, and it's going to go through all the news we've captured already. And so you should have already done this or provided your own news source here. And so there's tons of data here. It's going to go through that, determine which context is appropriate to my stock symbol, to my query here, and then it's going to send this prompt to GPT-4. And in less than a minute, maybe it's like 30 seconds or so, we should get a nice lengthy report about Google stock that's based on up-to-date news. And right there, you see this report generated with, it looks like it has some price targets that came from some analysts, some positive factors, so dominance online advertising, cloud computing, AI, Google Cloud Platform, strong financials, and then it discussed headwinds, the usual ones, regulatory challenges, rising competition, and so forth. So yeah, competition, cloud computing, and AI are competing against well-established players like Microsoft and Amazon. So about what we would expect, and you can experiment with this prompt to make it more sophisticated and make this report even more detailed and a bit better. I left it pretty generic at this point because I want you to customize it and do what you want. All right, that's report type number 1. What about report type number 2? If they choose competitor analysis. So I'm going to say if report type equals competitor analysis, I'm going to generate 2 inputs. So I'm going to call it symbol 1 and symbol 2, stock symbol 1 and stock symbol 2. And I'm going to say if they've entered in stock symbol 1 and stock symbol 2, I'm going to do another spinner. I'm going to say generating report for symbol 1 versus symbol 2. And I'm going to say write a report on the competition between symbol 1 stock and symbol 2 stock and write that response. And so let's try this. And I'm going to switch here to competitor analysis. And now you see we have 2 input boxes, and I can do Google and Microsoft just like that and talk about the AI competition between these two that is evolving week to week, day to day, minute by minute. Who knows what's going to happen next week? Something exciting seems to be happening every week in this AI world. And here we go. Competition between Alphabet's Google and Microsoft intensifies as AI developments advance, and this As mentioned in the previous video, it mentions very up-to-date news on Samsung considering replacing Google Search with Microsoft's Bing and how this switch to Bing might impact them. I'm not sure why this is formatted weird, but it says $3 billion in annual revenue is at stake with this deal and a $20 billion contract with Apple. So if Apple decides to use this as a negotiating tactic saying, oh, well, we're going to switch to Bing, they'll probably get a better deal on their deal with using Google Search on the iPhone. It talks about Microsoft's lead in AI development happening right now, but it also talks about the AI chatbot Bard had a bit of a shaky start. And so, yeah, lots of things to consider. And, you know, you might know some of this stuff already, but I guarantee if you run this on thousands of news articles, you'll probably pick up on something pretty quickly. And it might help you, you know, maybe each day you want to have this run one time and email you a report like this, or email someone you know a report like this. Get all your news done for the day instead of like scrolling Twitter all day following news. Knock it all out in one shot. And that's where these tools like OpenAI and Llama Index really help you out. You can sift through tons of data in no time and maybe automate some of these tasks that a financial analyst does, right? Evaluating historical and current financial data, understanding financial conditions, studying industry, specific businesses, trends and research data, data-backed reports. These are all things you can probably do with OpenAI. And so this might really empower financial analysts to do a lot of work. Like an individual analyst could maybe do 10 times more work, which means we might not need quite as many financial analysts if they have these nice tools available. So yeah, that's it for now. Thanks for watching this video on Llama Index. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you want to see next. I guarantee I'm going to get to LangChain eventually. I know a lot of people are asking for that. And so that's on the upcoming roadmap. So thanks a lot for watching. See you next time. Bye.